Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad.
And so this is episode 7. It's episode 007, and it's the holidays. So you know what? Pick your poison. This week we've got a little arrogance, we've got some disruption, and some communication.
Sounds good. Why don't we dive right in?
All right. So the first thing we're going to do is the garage. And Sam, I had this car the last time we spoke, the Kia Cadenza, and now you've got it. So what do you think? Was I on track? Or
no, I think you were pretty much on track. The Cadenza is actually gone now, and since we were a few days late in recording this episode.
Yeah, sorry. My company got sold, and so I'm just dealing with tap dancing.
But yeah, I mean, in general,
Yeah,
I agreed with what you had on the Cadenza, what you said about the Cadenza. And it's a really nice car, very roomy. I mean, huge back seat. So, if you've got a family to haul around, you could put the kids in the back seat, and chances are, unless you're about 7 feet tall, they won't be able to reach the back of your seat. So very, very impressive car.
One of the things I did notice about it, because I actually had to load up and take a bunch of video gear to a shoot, the back seat, the seat back doesn't fold down.
I never tried that.
And it has a large trunk.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah. So I just assume that most cars it does these days, especially a front wheel drive sedan like that. But no, you couldn't fold the seat back down unless there was some like ninja switch I missed, but I couldn't find it. So it wasn't a huge deal. That trunk is very large. For gear. And it has nicely hidden hinges, so you can actually load it like right up to the hilt, and when you close the lid, the hinges won't crush your stuff. So it's again, nice touch.
So yeah, I've actually moved on from the Cadenza now, and I'm driving the 2017 GMC Acadia, which is it's interesting to see how GMC has changed the Acadia this go around for the second generation of it.
Yeah, it got smaller and lighter, and it almost sort of overlaps with the terrain.
It's actually still a good bit bigger than the terrain. It kind of splits the difference between where the original Acadia and the rest of GM's Lambda family were when they launched almost 10 years ago, and where the Acadia and the Chevy Equinox are. So it's more of a midsizer. So it's several inches shorter than the old one. You can still get it as a 3-row, but interestingly, talking to some folks at GM about what their strategy this time as they replace those the first generation of their big crossovers is, they're kind of dividing them a little bit more compared to what they did last time. Last time, there were ultimately 4 different variants, although one, the Saturn, only lasted a couple of years before the Saturn brand went away. And they have the Buick Enclave, the GMC Acadia, and the Chevy Traverse. They're all exactly the same size with the same powertrains. They all had unique styling and different levels of equipment, but they were they were all the same size, same packaging. And so this time, they made the Acadia a fair bit smaller. And from talking to people at GM recently, it seems that they found that a lot of the Acadia buyers were more likely to only use the first 2 rows of seats. And, if they used the 3rd row at all, it tended to be very much an occasional use thing, whereas Traverse buyers were more likely to have more passengers and actually use that 3rd row more regularly.
That's an interesting split too, because it's like the first generation of that Lambda crossover was like classic GM branding. Like, I mean, you go right back to the 50s, right? Where the Buick, the Pontiac, the Oldsmobile, the Chevy, the Cadillac. The Cadillac was a little bit different case, but they all sort of, had that brand identity on the same parts, and that's very much what the Lambda was. Are they going to, bring the other vehicles on that Lambda platform down to the size of the Terrain, or are they going to leave the Terrain smaller and make the Traverse slightly larger because it does get that third row used more?
That's something I can't really talk about yet. They're going to be showing they're going to show the Traverse. They announced today, as we're recording this, that the new Traverse, the 2018 Traverse, will be unveiled at the Detroit Auto Show next month. So all the information about that is still yet to be announced publicly. It's so we'll find out in a few weeks. But
usually when people say to me, like, I can't talk about that means the question was dead on. So I'm going to pat myself on the back. How does it compare with like stuff that it competes with, like the Honda Pilot?
The Acadia is really nice. It's surprisingly fuel efficient. It's getting about 23, almost 24 miles per gallon, especially in highway driving. The one I have is the all-terrain model. They've got, several different trim levels as usual. And the all-terrain only comes as a 2-row, so it's only a 5-seater. Whereas the other ones, you can get them with a third row, which is obviously less roomy than it was on the previous generation. But with only 2 rows in there, the back seat, the second row, very much like the Cadenza, is huge in terms of legroom and headroom. One thing I have noticed is the belt line seems really high. So if you like to drive with your elbow up on the windowsill, unless you're, particularly tall, you probably won't find it very comfortable to do that. But aside from that, I don't really have any major complaints about it. I think it's a good size, mid-size SUV. So if the previous generation, which was pretty much the same size as the Tahoe, full size body on frame SUVs, if that was a little too big for your taste, but the Terrain is a little too small, then, I think this one is kind of just right. It's in that middle space there where GM didn't really have anything in terms of a crossover up till now. So you've got the Terrain and Equinox as the compacts, competing with the Honda CR-Vs and Ford Escapes of the world. And now you've got something in that middle step there. So we'll see what else they come up with to replace the current Equinox and the or not the Equinox, the Traverse and the Buick Enclave, which I think if I recall correctly, the Enclave was actually the first of the Lambdas to debut. And as far as I know, Buick is not showing anything. They're not showing anything new at the Detroit Auto Show. So presumably we'll see the Enclave replacement sometime either at Chicago or perhaps at the New York Auto Show in April.
Well, it's an interesting case too, because I'm not sure, I haven't really looked at the sales figures, but I'm not really sure that they necessarily have a sales problem with the Enclave, because it's a big crossover vehicle. It's aged, but it's aged very gracefully. That's still a nice car to drive. And they're just launching the Envision. So I think their attention at this point is probably toward getting some buyers for that. And I actually saw one on the road, which was neat. I was like, what is that?
Yeah.
Oh, neato. And I actually said neato. But the Acadia, the trade-offs that they've made, like, when you get it in 2-row version, because they've decided to make that third row more occasional use, you do get that benefit of, like, it's a loose fit vehicle, right? Like, not loose fit like fit and finish, but sort of like relaxed fit jeans.
Yeah,
right?
you've got lots of space to stretch out. And, you never feel cramped in there like you do sometimes if you're sitting in the back seat of some of the compacts. And the Envision, similarly, the Envision's a little bit smaller than where the Acadia is today, but bigger than the Terrain and Equinox. So they're kind of putting together what seems to be this kind of more granular stair step up the line, so you should be able to find, between the three brands, you should be able to find one, actually the four brands, including Cadillac, that fits you just right, depending on what your needs are, and what your wants are in terms of luxury and equipment and size. So there should be one for everybody.
Yeah. And the Equinox and the Terrain at this point are feeling every bit of their age. They were acceptable, I think, when they were new. And now, like, when I get in one of those, I'm just like, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Hello, 2008. And it's fine. They're a fine vehicle. And they're another one that, like, even in that size class, right? The CRV RAV4 kind of size, they offer a little bit more, at least length, I feel. So they're actually a little bit bigger than some of the competitors. At least they feel
they're actually closer lengthwise. They're closer in size to, the next size up, think cars like the Ford Edge, than they are to the CRV and Escape. Although they aren't as wide as some of the midsiders. Right, they're
still narrow, yeah. So back to the Acadia too. Like I'm assuming because you had the all-terrain, it had the V6, the 310 horsepower V6, but they offer it with a turbo as well too. Right?
Yeah, I believe it's available with a 2-liter turbo. I don't know if you can get the 2-liter with the all-terrain trim package. So I think that one's V6 only, but other variants of the Acadia are available with the 2-liter turbo, I think.
And it has, with the V6, it's got that transmission we talked about last time, the 6F, or what is it? It's the GM.
Actually,
GM doesn't call it the 6F, right?
Well, you're thinking of the 9-speed?
No, I thought it only had a 6-speed.
It does have a 6-speed now. Yeah. I think sometime in 2017, probably for, 2018 model year, when they switch over to 2018 model year, sometime in mid-year, they will probably start installing the new 9-speed automatic in there.
Yeah. And I mean, that's probably they just don't have that many.
Right. They're ramping up production on those transmissions right now.
Yeah. And so, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the 6-speed.
No, it's fine. I mean, it's a good, smooth shifting transmission. You're not going to have any real complaints about it. It certainly doesn't have any of the classic CVT characteristics that a lot of customers don't like.
Yeah. If the one thing I remember about that transmission, I think GM's programming is a little better than Ford's on that one, but
it's gotten better over the years. Early on, when they first launched it back about 2006 or 2007, the Fords were actually smoother. The GMs had some issues early on with the shift quality, but they got better over time. They upgraded some of the internal components and changed some of the control software, and so it's quite a bit better now than it used to be.
Huh. Does it give you a kick down when you ask for it, or does it make?
Yeah, no, it gives it'll give you a kick down when you need it. So it doesn't have any issues with accelerating to merge onto a freeway or make a pass when you need to. So yeah, it's got and the current generation is about almost 750 pounds lighter than the old one. With similar power, so performance is definitely going to be better than the previous generation model.
Yeah, well, and the fuel economy, you touched on that. You're getting 20s. Like the best I was ever able to get out of a Lambda might have been about 17 combined. Yeah. So that's big.
Yeah,
that's really
today,
good.
Today I had to go to a meeting, and the temperature was in the about 12 or 13 degrees out. So it was pretty cold out. So it wasn't quite as good today as it was over the weekend when it was slightly warmer. But dropped down to about 19 today. But overall, yeah, it's been quite good. I'm quite impressive.
So there's another choice in the family crossover class that is not starved for choice at this point. Like that's where all the life in the automobile business is.
Yeah, well, with GM also announcing today that they're going to have some temporary shutdowns at 5 of their car assembly plants in January due to slowing sales of cars. That's everybody's rushing to the to crossovers and sport utilities, and I think it's if you actually certainly like me, if you prefer a car over a utility, then now's probably a good time to go get a good deal on one. because there's plenty of inventory.
Yeah, especially. Right. I was going to say, especially now, get yourself a nice ATS.
There you go.
Want something that tidy, because they're having a hell of a time selling that car. And it's a good car.
It's a great car.
All right. Well, speaking of good cars, in my driveway this week, I got a 2017 Honda Ridgeline. And I like this truck a lot. Like, this is the truck that every truck buyer should buy. And they're kind of a bit player in the market, but I mean, especially when you compare them to like the F-150 or the GMC and the Chevy together. But I don't think Honda ever had any plans for world domination with their truck. Sort of the same as Toyota with the Tundra. They wanted metered out success. And I think they've really achieved it. The thing that I like a lot about the Ridgeline, and I've kind of always liked about the Ridgeline, is that it's really well thought out. It's not just like, well, we're going to build a pickup, and so we're going to start with a full frame, and we're going to put a big V8 in it and solid axles, and there you go, pickup. And this is also kind of its Achilles heel, I guess, too. But they really thoroughly redefined what a pickup is, at least in the modern idiom. I mean, there's been pickups like this in the past. The Subaru Brat, the Volkswagen Caddy, they were all a little smaller.
Yeah, they weren't really anything like the Ridgeline. I mean, I don't think there's ever really been anything quite like the Ridgeline.
Yeah, that's fair. And yes, it is a pickup built on a minivan, sedan, whatever set of bones.
Minivan
fine.
sport utility. Or minivan crossover, it shares its platform with the Pilot, the Honda Pilot, and the Acura MDX and the Odyssey.
Yeah, and none of this is bad. I'm not criticizing so much as I'm sort of pointing out, because I really like it. I think that those are actually, there's a lot of benefit to that, and you can't knock the Ridgeline and adore the Jeep Comanche. In the same breath, because they're the same thing.
Yeah, very much so.
In essence, the Comanche didn't have a frame. The frame pieces they made for the Comanche were sort of welded together, boxed sections. Actually, it was something that was. There was a Hornet that was like the forerunner of it. I actually wrote an article about it that never got published, so maybe I should publish that article.
Absolutely.
I think it was the Jeep Cowboy, but. The Ridgeline, there's a lot of myth and sort of opinion out there about it. And I was actually trying to pitch the guys at Autoblog about this. I don't know if they're going to pick it up, so I'll just use my talking points here. So there's just I came up with 5 ways people are wrong about the Ridgeline. And now because it's winter, the first one is that the Ridgeline is too weak to plow. Nonsense. Certainly it's not a truck that you want to use as like your, landscaping commercial operation plow all night kind of truck. Correct. It's not that kind of thing. But that beats the hell out of even like an F-250. It's not a nice thing to do to your truck.
Well, I mean, when you consider, that it's got comparable power, it's in the 300 horsepower range to what a base F-150 offers. And, it's quite a bit lighter than an F-150. It's going to have decent performance. And, you put a set of snow tires on that thing on an all-wheel drive Ridgeline, and you probably, it's probably going to do fine with a plow on there.
It's actually going to do better than the F-150 because, the F-150 has that very old school kind of four-wheel drive setup. The Ridgeline has a front. I mean, I know it's front
wheel drive biased, which actually, yeah, you're right. With the extra weight of a plow on there, right. Is the Ridgeline actually rated to hold a plow though? I mean, the front structure.
So the one that I found is it's called the Meyer Home Plow, and basically what you do is you mount a Class 2 receiver hitch to the front. And you might have to trim the fascia a little bit, and then the plow actually mounts into the receiver of that hitch. So it is a light duty plow, but again, a lot of people that buy pickups, especially the Cowboy Cadillac kind of pickups, they are taking a heavy duty vehicle and using it for light duty work. So I don't see a problem if you have even a pretty decent sized piece of property using your Ridgeline with a light duty plow to get the job done. I mean, it's a product that exists, and a lot of times truck stuff is overkill for what it's used for. So I was psyched. there is a plow, and it actually works in the Grand Cherokee too.
Oh, really?
So I was like, ooh, if my driveway didn't need to be repaved, I could use that. Also, the four-wheel drive system in the Ridgeline, it doesn't have a low range, but it will vector torque, so it actually makes the vehicle handle better, and it's got a locking feature. As far as I'm pretty sure it has a locking feature, so you can while it doesn't have low range, you can still lock it and get your 50-50 distribution. So it's it's a little different, but again, it will absolutely plow for you if that's what you needed to do. The Ridgeline is too weak to tow. Again, Bopkiss. It tows more than most people ever need to tow. Pretty sure it's rated for 5,000.
I think it's 5,000. Yeah.
Yeah. Plus payload. So I didn't actually do the math on this yet, but my thought was, okay, so that some of those big Rams, like the Ram 1500, when you get the double cab with the short bed and the 4-wheel drive and stuff, that its payload is like 500 pounds. So that's a grocery store run with your whole family in the car. Like that's not much at all. And my thought was like, I wonder if the Ridgeline, you could load it up and still have a decent payload. So I didn't look at payload, but 5,000 pounds is more than, your weekend warrior really is going to tow a lot of times. Or if you've got a small boat, it's definitely going to handle that. You're quite correct in saying 5,000 pounds is not quite enough to comfortably haul like a car trailer, and like if you have a classic car or race car or something like that. It
depends. I mean, if you're towing a Lotus, then it'll be plenty.
Or a Miata. Yeah, certainly a Miata would work. So it depends on what you're towing. If you're in the business of hauling classic Detroit, big iron stuff.
Not going to work for that. But yeah, I'm just looking at the specs right now. The front wheel drive Ridgeline is rated at 3,500 pounds and the all wheel drive is 5,000 pounds. And the payload capacity ranges between 1,450 and 1,580, depending on the trim level and two wheel drive versus all wheel drive.
Right. So it's honestly, any Ridgeline is going to potentially have a better payload than some real pickups, depending on how they're equipped. So hooray, because all the Ridgelines are extended cabs. They're all pretty comfy and roomy. Okay. So that brings me to my next point. Is the Ridgeline is expensive? Not really.
Have you looked at the price of an F-150 or a Ram or Silverado lately?
Right. So, and that's how they get you, right? Like the regular pickups, certainly they can have an attractive price or a highly incentivized price or a very low starting price. You start adding stuff to it, they get expensive very quickly.
Right. I mean, those low priced versions are the what they call the work trucks that they sell to contractors. No, I mean, seriously, I mean,
they call the work trucks.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, GM actually has the WT designation. That's the trim level on those, literally for work truck.
Right. The WT, like I was surprised to see that they still make that. That is the truck that makes you cry by the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, it comes with steel wheels and, basic AM, FM radio and, like no amenities at all. They're designed, for contractors and, they'll put, equipment racks on the back, for the utility workers and things like that. Those aren't the ones that regular customers buy.
Right. And the ones that regular customers buy are sort of just, they're gussied up versions though. So you're starting with the truck that's built to be like high profit, cheap, and just honestly disposable. Like if you see an F-150 or Silver, I don't want to pick on the F-150, even though it's the best selling truck, the Ram 1500 or the Silverado 1500 or something that's actually been used for work, they get used up quick. Every 4 to 5 years, the buyers that buy a lot and they're turning over their fleets just because the trucks start to age out. They start to get worn. I don't know that that's really quite the same issue that you're going to have with the Ridgeline. Certainly it's definitely not aimed at the work truck market. It's aimed at the suburban truck buyer who also uses it to commute and, pull the boat to the lake on the weekend. So it's a different demographic and it's not expensive when you start to consider like it'll top out in you'd have a hard time pushing 50 with the Ridgeline. And it's going to be very nicely equipped. It may not be quite like King Ranch equipped, but
true. But then again, a King Ranch doesn't have a trunk in the back, which is something that only the Ridgeline is the only truck on the market with an enclosed trunk in the back of the bed.
Right. And there are some goofy features too, like the way they've got the transducer to turn the bed into a giant speaker.
Yeah. But actually, you'd be surprised how well that works. I went to a tailgate party for the Detroit Lions home opener back in September that Honda hosted, and we had a bunch of Ridgelines, and they turned on the stereos in these things, blasting the music out of the back of these things. It actually sounds really good.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's honestly what it is in the hi-fi world. That's a planar speaker, and for years there were lots of guys who loved their Magnapans. So yeah, I mean, it does work, and it's cool, but it's like one of those. Okay, fine. It's the same thing as like, you can put ice in the little compartment and cool your beer while you're on the way to the lake. Yes. But there's just goofy features on regular trucks too. So
what it is, it's a great personal use truck. If you're buying a truck, if you don't need a work truck, if you're buying a truck for your own personal use and using it for tailgate parties or to go camping or whatever, hauling bales of straw, it's great for that.
Yeah, and that's where I definitely come down where people will say the Ridgeline is not really a truck. I think that's nonsense. Actually, it is a truck. It's a variation on the theme, for sure. But it's kind of very sensible. It's the truck that I would buy, and because I don't have a farm yet, so I don't need that kind of truck. But it'd be nice to have a truck that I can commute in it, and it gets decent fuel economy. And I can, feel comfortable that I can put the snowblower in the back of it and take it, where, I can go over to my mother-in-law's or something with it. It's useful. It holds the family. It's comfortable. It's quiet. It's certainly better to drive than any other truck. There's like steering feedback.
It's got fantastic ride quality too.
Yeah, I was going to say it rides like a ballerina. It's fantastic. It's great to drive. And that the V6, no EcoBoost V6 snarls like that Honda engine. I got on the highway with it the other day, and the VTEX kicked in, and it was great. It just took on this hard metallic edge, and I was like, yeah. Yeah, and then I looked down. I was going way too fast.
And of course now the second generation model actually looks more like a conventional pickup truck too, which it was a deliberate choice on the part of Honda. They heard the complaints about the styling of the original. The people that bought the original one loved all the various features that you've been talking about, but there was a lot of customers that didn't really like the way it looked. And so this time they made it look more like a pickup, and it seems to be helping sales.
Yeah, I mean, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. The first one I thought looked a little goofy, but then it wasn't too far off from some of the other stuff on the market. What was the
Chevy Avalanche?
Gosh, I was going to say we forget so fast, and it was the Avalanche. And the Avalanche had that same kind of weird C-pillar treatment, and full body side versus the split bed. And like the Ridgeline, that was the largest stamping their body presses could make. And Honda has, I think they've still got the quick change kind of body presses. So in their plants, the body press has to be able to make the stampings for every vehicle.
Right.
Right. Like,
all their plants are designed for flexibility.
Right. So now they've gone to two body side stamping. So the cab and the bed are separate. But it's still a unit body. And overall, so the unit body is going to ride so much better than a full frame pickup. It's overall going to have a lot more strength. Not for maybe like towing 30,000 pounds, but just overall, it's going to be a stiffer, more rigid structure for the suspension to mount to, which is why it rides better, which is why it's lighter on its feet because it's not as heavy. And it's why it gets better fuel economy. Given, like you say, personal use, it's absolutely a truck. And it's a truck for truck people. The buyer demographics are actually really similar to GMC buyers. They're just a few years younger, like a couple of years younger. So overall, like there are truck people buying these trucks. And so I just wanted to put that to rest. That's all. I was very impressed with it. And I think that if it didn't have the Honda badge on it, if this were the next F-150,
or Ranger.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the Ranger is going to be kind of like that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's going to be.
As far as we know, if assuming the Ranger is built, the new Ranger is built on the a derivative of the current global Ranger platform, that's going to be a body on frame. It's not going to be a unit body like this one.
Okay. I apparently took my eye off the global Ranger ball and didn't realize it wasn't unibody, but yeah, I mean, it could be a great Ranger, or I honestly think that this is so much better than what they sell as the just regular F-150 in so many ways. Like, there's definitely a case for the work truck, but all of the other variants, the ones that actually get sold so much, are not as good as the Ridgeline in the way they get used. So if this had a Ford badge on it, I'm sure there would be a lot of people who are very upset, but there'd also be a lot of people who just bought it.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, if Ford sold something like this, as say an F-100 to appeal to, the personal use truck buyers, they could probably sell a lot of them.
I bet they could.
Yeah, maybe off the next generation Explorer platform.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe they're already working on it.
Who knows?
Talk to Mike Levine so he can say we won't comment on future product. Ford's pretty buttoned up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about arrogance, because arrogance is a thing. It's not mine, but you had a post this week. I think it was on Forbes, where you talked about Uber. A couple of things about Uber, and I completely agree with you that they are they're arrogant, and they are run by terrible people, and that's why I have vowed to never use an Uber. I don't care how nice they are. So yeah, they're also they had a little trouble with one of their self-driving cars too.
Yeah. So for those that haven't been watching the news, last Tuesday or Wednesday of last week, Uber they expanded their self-driving car test program, where they're actually picking up passengers from Pittsburgh, where they started back in September, to San Francisco. And since September, they've had their original fleet of Ford Fusions, self-driving Ford Fusions, running around Pittsburgh. And for the San Francisco program, they have launched with the Volvo XC90s that they're starting to use now. Back in August, they announced a deal with Volvo to develop a self-driving car platform based on Volvo's new scalable product architecture that underpins the XC90 and the S90. So presumably, what they're going to develop is something bespoke, a bespoke body for Uber's use as a ride-hailing platform, using the Volvo architecture as the underpinnings. And immediately, like within hours after they launched this in San Francisco last week, we got
illegally, I might add.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. Within hours of this launching, there were at least two different videos posted of two different Uber test vehicles running red lights in San Francisco. So that's not a good start. One of them was very close to a pedestrian when that happened. So that's not a good start for an autonomous vehicle program.
If their answer had been like, "Well, it should have been in the Uber," I wouldn't have put it past them. That's not what they said.
Well, it wasn't far off from that. They quickly blamed the safety drivers who were in the cars. So that even though these cars are capable of autonomous operation, they all have a safety driver behind the wheel to take over in the event of an emergency, and an engineer riding in the right front seat, or the right front seat, and they're carrying passengers in the back. And then not long after that, the state of California came out and said, basically, contacted Uber and said, we want you to stop this test program right now because, California, they passed a law a couple of years ago to enable companies to test their self-driving cars on public roads. But in order to do that, basically you have to go to the California DMV, pay $150 fee to get a permit to do this. Much like anybody who wants to register any other car has to pay a registration fee to register the car. Uber decided that no, we don't think so. We're not going to do it, and they have so far, at least as of today, which is Monday, December 19th, they have still refused to get one of these test permits for testing their vehicles, and so the state has threatened to go to court to get injunctive relief to stop the program.
But why? So I guess my question is like, why? This is why I think they're just hugely arrogant. Like, what's the problem with playing by the rules? Like, play ball. If you want this
has been Uber's MO since they launched 7 years ago as a ride-hailing platform in San Francisco. Basically, everywhere they go, they just ignore whatever laws are in place for taxis. One of the few places where they have actually obeyed the law is in Austin, Texas, where last year, or it was either earlier this year or last year, there was a vote, a referendum where voters said, that ride-hailing companies like Uber and Lyft have to do more thorough background checks on their drivers. And so both of those companies actually pulled out of the Austin market. So there's no ride-hailing services in Austin that I'm aware of at this point. But basically everywhere else they've gone, they just ignore whatever laws are in place, covering taxi services, and they just start operating and, to hell with it.
Yeah, guys, that doesn't help your case. Like, not only that, like, just the statements that their CEO has made. He's just a reprehensible person. Not cool.
Travis Kalanick is not a good person.
And like the fact that there's apparently you can just spy on whoever you want if you. Yeah,
well, there's that too. The so-called God mode in their platform.
God mode. What a bunch of douchebags.
Yeah, I don't know if it's officially called that, but that's what it's been referred to in a lot of press reports. Essentially, what it does is it allows Uber employees to track users, where they are, what they're doing. So if you have the Uber app on your phone, you can be tracked even when you're not riding in an Uber vehicle. They can track where you are using the app, and then they have spied on media and reporters that have been critical of Uber. They've also, spied on various celebrities. So, there's just so many things that are just awful about this company. The thing is, I support the principle of what Uber's wants to do in terms of disrupting the taxi business, because, the taxi business is pretty awful as well.
I was just going to say, certainly anytime you're bringing something new and different to the market, you're going to run into the press, and the press is going to react with well, that's different, so we don't like it kind of way, because, it's honestly at the core of it where people don't tend to like change. On the other hand, what they're doing is absolutely, from a user perspective, fantastic. You can call up, you can pull up the app, you can get the car, it'll come. It's usually a nicer experience than riding in a traditional taxi cab. Certainly, the taxi cab industry in most cities is a little protection racket, so that'd be great to break up. We've got, here in Boston, you buy the medallions. The medallions are worth a fortune, and the bottom has dropped out of that market because of Uber and Lyft, and it's sort of a double-edged sword. Like, you are coming in and you're changing a market. So there's good and bad. Like, you are really putting the squeeze on other business people. That is what happens when you disrupt, but you don't have to be such a dick about it.
I totally agree. Lyft, whenever, if I'm traveling and I need a ride somewhere, if I have the option, I will always choose Lyft over Uber. I've had much better experiences with Lyft than with Uber. And I think they're from everything I've seen, at least, for all I know, they may be doing some similar things in the background to what Uber's doing. I certainly hope not. But we certainly have not seen any reports of the kind of behavior from Lyft that we've seen from Uber. And Uber's, company leadership, their corporate leadership is just, they're terrible. So, I just refuse to patronize them whenever possible.
Well, that's awesome. They're never going to sponsor our podcast.
Probably not. But one of the other things that I wrote in that article, and then I had a follow up a couple of days later, is at the end of it, I kind of posed the question, of Volvo, is a company that, most people have only good things to say about the company, about them as a company. I mean, they've been for almost their entire history, they've been huge proponents of improving vehicle safety. They've had all kinds of safety innovations, in terms of seat belts and body structures and their seats and all kinds of things in their vehicles. And, overall, everybody, most people think very highly of Volvo. And, having this partnership with Uber, I had to wonder, it's like, why aren't they speaking out? Why aren't they saying more about this, or kind of pushing Uber, to behave a little better on this? And so I actually reached out to Volvo and got a comment from them. Basically what I was told by a Volvo spokesman was that as far as the testing of these vehicles goes, that's entirely in Uber's ballpark. Essentially, all Volvo is doing for this partnership, quote unquote partnership they have with Uber, is supplying the vehicles and helping them with some of the vehicle engineering. But any testing and development of the autonomous systems on those vehicles is entirely in Uber's hands. And Volvo is not at all involved in that. They actually have their own separate autonomous vehicle development program that they have going. They have a joint venture with Autoliv, a Swedish supplier of various safety systems, active safety systems and seat belts and other components. That they're developing their own autonomous systems for their vehicles. So they're not actually involved in this, which is, why they haven't, really spoken up at all about this or pushed Uber towards, trying to behave better in San Francisco.
I wonder if they actually, well, I'm sure they care a little bit just because they're skilled by association, but
yeah,
kind of like, like you guys got the cars, you do whatever, you help us refine our software, and we don't want to be involved beyond that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're not even, Volvo's not even involved with the software development that Uber's doing. I mean, that's completely in Uber's hands. Volvo has their own program entirely, and they're early in 2017, they're going to be launching their Drive Me test program in Sweden, and then later in the year, spreading it to the UK and China as well, with their own fleet of semi-autonomous XC90s. So that's their program, which is completely separate from what's going on with Uber. Basically, all they've really done with Uber is they've sold them a bunch of XC90s, and they're going to work with them, to develop a bespoke body, to go on their platform that Uber, will then buy vehicles from Volvo. But, once Uber buys the vehicles, then, Volvo doesn't really have any involvement beyond that point. Well, and then something similar is going on, kind of a segue. It's actually quite similar to what is going on with Fiat Chrysler and Google, or should I say Waymo?
Yeah. So Waymo, what I took from this was that Google had done enough development work that this is now ready. They're done with the hard engineering part. They're ready to market the product now, because it looks like their statement
not
says, really.
Oh,
okay. Because their statement makes it sound like, okay, now we're ready to build a business because we built the cars.
Yeah, I mean they're moving towards commercialization, but they're still a ways away from that. So last week, Waymo, they made the announcement, and it's been rumored that this is going to happen for some time now. They made the announcement that until now, the Google self-driving car program has been part of the Google X Labs program at Google. So it was part of their R&D efforts. And what they've done now is they've spun it off into a separate company, much like Google Fiber and Nest and some of the other companies that come under the umbrella of Alphabet Incorporated, which is the holding company that Google reorganized itself into last year. And that new company is called Waymo, and they're focusing on, commercializing self-driving technology. And based on what they've said so far and conversations I've had with people from Google/Waymo in recent months, what they want to do is develop the a package of sensors and actuators and the control software and processing for self-driving cars, and sell that to car makers. And then possibly also, they're also looking at other business models, like potentially providing ride hailing platform, the software platform for ride hailing, and doing some other things, that are related to the whole self-driving cars. But, they're not at this time looking at actually building Google cars. They want to provide their system to other manufacturers.
Right. So, I mean, that squares with what I was saying. Was like, okay, they've done enough development work. We're not going to build that funky little marshmallow. They're going to try to become an OEM. And that was sort of like what we had.
More of a tier 1 supplier.
Okay. Right. I'm sorry. You're right. But that's kind of what we had speculated when it first came up, before we even launched the podcast. When we had talked at one point or another, we were saying like it makes way more sense for them to play on their strength, and clearly the strength of automakers is building cars. They already work with a lot of suppliers for the technology that goes in them. So one of Google's great strengths is building software, building digital platforms, and solving those kind of issues. So the two almost seem like chocolate and peanut butter. They seem like they're good to go together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think going back several years now, Google has approached many of the big automakers, about using their software and their system in their vehicles, but the way they did it at the time, and this is before John Krafcik came on board as the CEO of Waymo and the self-driving car program, they took they had a very different attitude when they went to the car makers. They basically said, just bring us your cars and we'll put our stuff on there, and you don't need to worry about what's in there, which that was not an approach that was particularly amenable to any of the manufacturers, who knew that ultimately they were going to be responsible for whatever went on those vehicles. So they weren't prepared to take this kind of black box approach that Google was offering. Basically there was the attitude from Google, the typical Silicon Valley attitude that, we're smarter than you guys are, just trust us, and that wasn't going to fly.
Right.
So, I think with John Krafcik in charge there now, and I've known John for a number of years, going back to his days, even before he was CEO at Hyundai. He's a very smart guy. He's been in the auto industry for a long time, and I think he brought a more realistic approach to how Google needs to deal with car makers in order to get their stuff in there. And I would not be surprised, if within the next, 6 to 9 months, and probably sooner than that we start to get the first announcements of some production programs from Google. They're probably still going to be, several years out, probably not, until the early 2020s before they actually hit the road. But we'll probably start to hear of some more partnerships that go beyond the Fiat Chrysler partnership that was announced last May. And we saw the first vehicles today from that. That partnership was very limited. Basically all that, Fiat Chrysler's part in that partnership was much like Volvo's part in the Uber program, where essentially they were just supplying a fleet of Pacifica hybrid minivans, and then they worked with the Google engineers to integrate their sensing system and their processors and everything into the Pacificas. And then once those vehicles are built, which is now, that process has now been completed, Waymo engineers are now taking over that project, and they're doing all the development of the system. Fiat Chrysler is no longer directly involved in any of that development work.
Well, maybe though, looking out a couple of years from now, Waymo will be able to just buy the car business from Fiat Chrysler.
I wouldn't rule out that possibility.
No, I mean, you look at the Chrysler website, there's like 3 products on it.
Well, I mean, you got to look at all the brands. I mean, there's more than that. I mean, the Chrysler brand, there's only 3.
Yeah.
But
but
if
the
you
Dodge
look at
brand
Ram,
doesn't have too many either.
Yeah, but Dodge and Ram and Fiat and Alfa Romeo, and you add them all up, and it's a little bit more than that. But yeah, it's pretty sparse over there. And Jeep. I mean, Jeep is actually probably the biggest brand, in terms of having the most models there.
Yeah.
But I mean, FCA's market cap is not particularly great.
What's going on? I mean, it's a complete left turn for the podcast, but like, what the hell is going on over there? Like, the only thing they're doing, it seems to be, is like pumping money into Jeep. Fiat's not doing well in the US. They haven't refreshed any of their other products. It doesn't look as good for them as it had, 2.5 years ago. Like, it's like, what are they doing? Their cars have struggled. I mean, but everybody's cars have been struggling. Their cars are old, and I guess too.
Well, actually, the Dart and the Chrysler 200, Dodge Dart Chrysler 200, are only a couple of years old.
Right. Those,
but they did not have a great start in the marketplace. They haven't done exceptionally well. So it's basically the only brands that have really had a strong take up, a strong market are the Ram trucks, the Ram pickup trucks, and the Jeeps. Everything else, their Fiat, has struggled to get off the ground in the U.S. We'll see what happens with Alfa Romeo in 2017 as they get the Giulia going. That's their first closer to a mainstream product, after launching with the 4C.
Yeah, but I mean, so that just seems so dumb, because you're going to relaunch Alfa Romeo. Like, you're starting off behind the 8 ball when you're relaunching a brand in the U.S. that hasn't been here since 1992.
Well, I think what they're trying to do there is, if you look at the market as a whole, overall sales volumes in North America and most of the other mature markets in Western Europe and Japan, are pretty much, plateauing. We're not likely to see any significant growth. I mean, our forecast at Navigant, over the next 10 years is like less than half, about 0.5% annual growth rate at best. So basically you're looking at a flat market, overall, but what we're seeing is a shift in the marketplace going more up market. So the, premium brands are where there's actually some more significant growth. And so, there's a potential there if they can get a good launch with the Giulia and the Stelvio, and they can start to chip away and get some of that premium brand market share, then there's a lot higher margins in those vehicles than there are, in say a Chrysler or Dodge car. So that I think that's what they're trying to do, because one of the issues that FCA has is they've got a lot of debt. And they need to pay down that debt. So they're trying to focus their attention on the higher margin products. So Jeep, Ram, and Alfa Romeo, are all higher margin products. So
if they sell any,
well, yeah, if they, well, I mean, Jeep
has
Ram,
no problem. Jeep
and Ram are doing well. The Chrysler Pacifica is off to a good start. And that's also another higher margin product. And if they can gain a foothold with Alfa, there's certainly some potential for some improved cash flow from that. So that'll help. On the other hand, they also have to invest a lot, to gain that. So, the actual benefits of that might still be several years out, but longer term, I think that's what their strategy is. That seems to be what their strategy is. And then in the meantime, they're just kind of muddling along. It's seems a little unclear right now, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, they seem to be poised a couple of years ago, and now it just seems like they're a little bit unfocused, and they've taken product away from brands that really need it. Like you would think that Dodge would be the volume brand, and there's really nothing there.
Yeah, well, the problem there is they're the whole market for cars as opposed to utilities, is struggling. I mean, every brand, almost every brand, Honda seems to be kind of the exception to that, and to a lesser degree Toyota. But even Toyota, has seen sales of some of their the Camry and the Corolla start to slide in the past year. So, every other car maker is seeing sales of cars slide in favor of utilities. So certainly FCA's got that covered with Jeep. But
Jeep and Ram,
the only car that is getting any significant sales the only cars at Dodge that are getting any sales are the Charger and the Challenger. And
which are
those are getting old. Yeah,
I mean they're good cars, but they're old, and I guess that's okay in a certain way. I mean, it is disappointing that the Dart kind of stiffed. I mean, they did that to themselves. And I can understand the trepidation with limited resources to actually go take another bite at that, C segment Apple. Like it's expensive, and the return isn't necessarily there in such a crowded yet shrinking field. So, but it seems like everybody else has refreshed their C segment cars, not too long ago. So they're kind of going to miss out if they just kill the Dart and don't replace it. But I know there's also that talk about trying to partner up with someone. So.
Yeah, they want to partner with somebody to get a car to replace that. But we'll see if they get anywhere with that.
Yeah, I mean that's not a terrible plan. We get so emotional about it, but at the end of the day, it's business. So if they can sort of make some cold, calculated moves and cozy up with Honda or not Honda, Mazda or some other automaker that's small and needs a foothold, that they could do all right.
And make some really good cars.
Yeah, definitely. I'd be curious to see how they do with them. I mean, they're already they've got the Alpha, the Fiat 124. So, I mean, they've already opened the door a little.
Yeah, they've got a relationship with Mazda there, so that's a start.
Yeah,
we'll see if it goes any further.
I don't want them to mess it up. Don't mess it up. Anyway, the last topic we wanted to talk about was the new cars could be talking to each other as soon as 2020. So I saw this come out the other day too, where the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration wants to mandate vehicle-to-vehicle communications very soon. So this almost seems like sort of a car-based air traffic control.
Kind of. So what vehicle-to-vehicle communications technology is based on? Something called dedicated short-range communications, DSRC, which is actually a variant of Wi-Fi.
Yes, I should say too, this begins the acronym segment of this of the podcast. There might be a few.
Yeah. So, so the broader term that's used is V2X communications, or vehicle to external. So that includes vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to pedestrian, vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to cyclist, and so on. And until recently, all of these have been based on this DSRC technology. It's a Wi-Fi variant, and over the last 8 or 9 years, they've developed. Actually, even longer than that, they've developed standard messaging protocols that all the car makers are using. They've worked, with SAE and other standards organizations to develop a standard set of messages. And the idea is to extend the situational awareness for the driver beyond their line of sight. So, the messages can be sent back and forth between vehicles and traffic signals and whatever else, up to about 400 to 500 meters, so about 1,000 feet or so. So for example, if a car, 2 or 3 cars down the road, if the driver suddenly hits the brakes, send out a message, it'll blast out a message to all the other cars in the area, emergency braking activated. So your car will get an alert in the dashboard, and before you can see that car or see the cars in between you, have their brake lights come on, you can respond, before you can see something. Similarly, if you're approaching a blind intersection, in the city, cars coming from the other direction, around the corner of a building and you can't see it, you'll get an alert that there's a car approaching the intersection that you're also approaching. So what it's doing is it's sending out 10 times a second. It's sending out messages about your position, trajectory, speed, and various other bits of information, short messages that can give you alerts about what's going on.
So this is kind of the key for normal cars coexisting with autonomous cars, coexisting with other idiot drivers.
Yes, so. that's one aspect of it. So yeah, and if, for example, earlier this year, we had the accident where the Tesla driver in Florida, using autopilot, the sensors on the car were not able to detect a truck turning left across the car's path because of challenging lighting conditions. If you'd had V2V communications between the truck and that Tesla, it could have been another layer of information that the vehicle could have used to say, "Oh, there's a truck turning in front of me. I'm going to hit the brakes," instead of just plowing right under it. Similarly, when we had the low speed collision in Mountain View, California, between one of Google's self-driving prototypes and a local transit bus, where the self-driving car drove into the side of the bus, assuming that the bus was going to stop when it had to change lanes, and it didn't. The V2V could be used to signal intent between the vehicles. So it could have signaled to the self-driving car that the driver of the bus was not slowing down, was not applying the brakes. And, so the self-driving car could have stopped before it ran into the side of the bus. So there's all kinds of information like this, it extends the capabilities beyond what the sensors can see, because this, the sensors on an autonomous car or even, a conventional car with driver assist systems, it's like your eyes, you can't see through other objects, unless, if they're not transparent. So you can only see what's within your line of sight, and to see beyond that, or to get intent, you need other information. And so that's where V2V comes in. And, another way where it can help is because it's a variation of Wi-Fi. Phones that have Wi-Fi in them can also broadcast DSRC messages. So, for pedestrians, if you're walking out into the street from between a couple of cars parked on the side of the road, and, you've got a phone in your pocket that's broadcasting DSRC messages, drivers coming down the street will get an alert that there's a pedestrian, approaching. And so, hopefully the driver of that vehicle, if it's human driven, will slow down and stop. Or, if it's an autonomous vehicle, it'll slow down and stop before it hits that pedestrian.
So I had a creative writing exercise that I started just on a whim. At a certain point, we're going to have to come to grips with the fact that all this stuff is great and it works, and it's going to make life harmonious, shall we say. But for those of us
that's the theory anyway.
Right. But for those of us who aren't, unless we're compelled to upgrade, there are going to be some of us who just won't. And so if you have a car that doesn't put out these signals, are we going to at some point not be able to work on the roads with these other vehicles? Or, I know that they're going to have the other kind of sensing packages, which will allow them to at least detect and avoid, but it's still at a certain point, you're then relying on other cars to be safe on the road. And that seems like nonsense.
There's a couple things there.
My dystopian future.
Well, the future is absolutely dystopian. There's no question about that. We're all doomed. So, I think,
okay.
I think we can, especially, after today, with the electoral college, I think we can safely say that we're all doomed.
Merry Christmas.
But setting that aside for the moment, there will, for many, many years to come, there will be a lot of cars on the road that don't have, any of this sort of communication hardware built in, and that's a given. What we're doing though is, with the regulation that was published by NHTSA last week, and there's now a 90-day comment period, and assuming that the whole thing doesn't get derailed, by the new administration, which is probably unlikely because there's general industry agreement. That the regulation was put together, with a lot of input from industry, and the auto industry as a whole generally supports the regulation. So it seems that as regulations go, this one is unlikely, or is less likely to, be a problem, be seen as a problem. But if everything goes forward as planned, about a year from now, the regulation will be finalized. And then 2 years after that, so this is the timeline, 2 years after that. So around the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, the phase-in period will start for new vehicles. So we're not, there's no plans to ever mandate this for existing vehicles, but, over time, most existing vehicles eventually get scrapped out and they will eventually be replaced. But starting in 2020, and in 2020, half of all new cars will have to be equipped with V2V transmitters. The following year, 75%, and the third year, 100% of new cars. So, as those cars replace older cars that are, eventually, scrapped out of the car fleet, eventually, the majority of new cars will be equipped. And, by my estimates, in the research report that we're about to publish from my company, Navigant Research, on connected vehicles, by 2025, we'll have somewhere around 60 million cars on the road globally with V2V communications, and that number will grow pretty rapidly from there, as all new vehicles are equipped. And then in addition to that, there's a number of companies that are working on aftermarket solutions and retrofit solutions, to add that capability to existing vehicles for drivers that want to have those kinds of alerts available to them.
Yeah. And so my story was about somebody trying to pay with a $5 bill because everything's gone to pay with your phone or like Venmo or whatever. And it's like, you can't.
What's a $5 bill?
That here. So anyway, I got into work one day and I just wrote down a bunch of notes and that was it. So that's that. So please, nobody steal my idea until I have a chance to write it and get it like in the New Yorker and make a lot of publicity, because you won't make any money. But yeah, I mean, it's going to happen. And I honestly think that it is a big key to answering the question about how we're actually going to get along with all of this new technology, because the new technology is coming. The bluest blue sky predictions are like, we should be having autonomous cars now, which is ridiculous. But like, they're going to get there, and all indicators point to, they're going to get there pretty quick in certain places. Like here where it snows, probably not so much, but eventually, yeah, they're going to get there as well. So just figuring out how we can all get along on the roads is good. And V2V seems like a thing. So at the end of the day, we're going to get a new federal motor vehicle safety standard that we can plow through and that they can amend as we go. So if you're as excited about federal motor vehicle safety standards as I can be occasionally, it's good to know. I mean,
FMVSS 150.
I read all of 108, which was pretty interesting, actually. Like, there's stuff in there that you just.
Which one is
108
that?
is the original FMVSS, I believe.
Okay.
Well, I guess it's not the original one, but it was like, it was from a while ago. Yeah, it was interesting. I'm pretty sure it's 108. I could be wrong on the number.
I know 105 was the brake systems standard, and I know that only because I used to work on brake systems as an engineer.
FMVSS 108. It might be lighting. I might have to do with lighting. That might be why I was reading it. So Google is going to be cranky, and I'll wait for it to pull it up. But in the meantime, we did get some questions, or a question.
Yes, we did. Actually, we got two questions from Jim.
Okay, so two questions from the same guy.
Yes. Right. So the first one is about the VW diesel scandal. The basic story has been retold many times that the engine control software could recognize that the vehicle was in test mode, so it would shift the engine to run in a cleaner but maybe less powerful or efficient manner. And what Jim's wondering is what engine parameters did the system change to accomplish the cheat? First of all, it doesn't really adjust engine timing or compression ratio or any of that, as Jim is asking. The way these cars, these modern diesels worked, these Volkswagen diesels, they have two main emission control systems on there that are required to meet current emission standards. One is the particulate filter that's used to get rid of the soot and smoke that older diesels always make. And then the other part is the NOx reduction system. And over the past decade or so, there's been two basic strategies that have been used by car makers to reduce, nitrogen oxide emissions from diesel engines. One is so-called SCR system, selective catalytic reduction. And so if you've driven most of the modern diesels that are on the road today, they have when you buy the gas tank, when you fill it up, or I'm sorry, the fuel filler, when you fill it with diesel, there's also a second port in there where about every 10 to 15,000 miles or so, you have to fill it up with a urea solution. And what that does is there's a urea injection system in the exhaust. And when that gets injected into the exhaust stream, the urea, as it hits the hot exhaust gases, it decomposes into ammonia, and that reacts with a catalyst that's in the exhaust system to basically convert the NOx into nitrogen and water. So it turns it into harmless gases. So that's the strategy that's been used by most automakers over the last 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, and do they use that's expensive. But is that used together with the particulate filter as well, or? Okay. Yeah, so it's dealing with two separate things. The particulate filter deals with the soot, and the SCR deals with the NOx. So that's what most automakers have done. What Volkswagen did on their 4-cylinder diesel engines is they went with a different strategy. They used something called a lean NOx trap. And the NOx trap, what it does is when for the diesel engines, in order to get the best fuel economy and performance, what they were doing is most of the time the engines were running somewhat lean. So they had a fairly lean air fuel mixture. Drives NOx up.
Which drives NOx emissions up because what it does is it raises the combustion temperature. And when the combustion temperature in the engine gets above about 600 degrees C, that's where it starts to produce more NOx. So if you keep the combustion temperature down, it makes less NOx. Running lean, you get better fuel efficiency and performance, but the NOx emissions go up. So what happens is the NOx trap actually absorbs, or what it's supposed to do is absorb some of the NOx, absorb most of the NOx from the exhaust stream as the exhaust passes through the trap. And then every few hundred miles, the engine is supposed to change to a slightly richer fuel mixture, which causes a different reaction within the NOx trap. So there's catalysts in there, and it converts the trapped NOx with you get some extra unburned hydrocarbons when you run rich with the fuel mixture, and that reacts and it causes the NOx to be converted into nitrogen, water, and CO2. So that's what's supposed to happen. But of course, when you do that, because you're running a little more rich, you're using more fuel, your mileage goes down, and also your performance is degraded a bit. What Volkswagen did was when the system detected that the car was running an emissions test, basically, when the engine was running and it was going through various cycles and the front wheels were turning on the dynamometer, but the rear wheels were not turning, then it said, oh, I must be running an emissions test, and it would run rich all the time. And as a result, or it would run rich more frequently, let's put it that way. And so because of that, it was keeping the NOx trap from getting saturated. And so the NOx emissions were much lower than they otherwise would be. When you're out on the real world and all four wheels were turning, then it would go to a much lower frequency of running rich, which gave you better fuel economy and better performance. But the NOx trap would get saturated with NOx and couldn't absorb any more NOx. And so when the NOx trap was full, the NOx would just flow right out the tailpipe. That's where the problem lied. And so all of this was done in software. There was no hardware defeat device, which it always irritates me when I hear people refer to this as Volkswagen using a defeat device, because there's no actual device. It's all just changes in software. And so that's what was happening. They were just running it lean more of the time, and letting the NOx trap get saturated with NOx and just letting the NOx flow out the tailpipe.
Nice guys. Because everybody was curious how Volkswagen was able to meet the emissions targets without using urea injection or that other expensive kind of stuff. It kept the price of VW diesels lower because they had less technology to hang off the engine. And
right. The NOx trap solution was less expensive than the urea injection, and other manufacturers tried to do the same thing, and they could never meet the emission standards with that approach. GM tried it when they were developing the first generation cruise diesel back in 2012, 2013. They tested both NOx traps and urea injection, and they found they couldn't meet emissions with the NOx trap and ended up using urea injection. Honda tried to do it and couldn't meet the standards. Mazda tried to do it. I mean, that's part of why Mazda's diesels have been delayed so long, is because they tried to do it with a NOx trap and realized that they could never meet the emission standards that way. So when they launched the CX-5 diesel in 2017, it's going to have a urea injection
system. Much of an open secret was this in the industry then? Because everybody who's trying to launch diesels, they're going to buy one of the cars, right, and go through it and test it. That's what automakers do. They buy each other's products and take them apart.
It's not clear how who had actually figured out what was going on, because it's not clear how much actual real world emissions testing they did with these. I think a lot of the testing they probably did. When they bought VW vehicles and benchmarked them, they were probably doing the tests, the same way the EPA does. And of course, if they were testing them in the lab, they would have gotten the same results that the EPA was getting. And unless they actually hooked up the equipment to test them on the road, they wouldn't have realized that there was a problem.
Well, and I'm sure that
because I'm sure that if they had realized it, somebody would have reported it to EPA a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean that's unfair advantage, and
yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure that now the test procedures have changed to catch these.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for diesels. EPA. For any new diesel vehicle that's coming to market now, EPA is actually doing real road testing of the vehicles in addition to the lab testing before they will grant certification for those. And in fact, starting in 2017 in Europe, the European Union is switching from the what they call the NEDC drive cycle, the new European drive cycle that they've been using since the late 1990s for emissions and fuel economy.
New European driving cycle.
Yeah. Well, they're switching away from the NEDC cycle to something called the new World Light Duty Test Protocol, which is being used in a number of regions around the world. And they're phasing that in from 2017, and that's going to include real world emissions testing for all new vehicles. starting, they're phasing that in starting in 17. And by, I think 2019 or 2020, all new vehicles that are certified will have to go through real world emissions testing, regardless of whether they run on gasoline or diesel.
Yeah. So thanks, guys. That's okay. I mean, I honestly, the emissions controls are a good thing, and it makes me chafe anytime I hear about people replacing stuff with test pipes and, getting the bypasses and things like that. Like, it's just...
Or rolling coal.
Yeah. So what was the other part of the question, or the other question that he asked?
The other question that Jim had was about internal combustion engines being electrified more and more. We're seeing things like electric power steering, electric superchargers and water pumps and AC compressors. And he thinks this is done to improve fuel economy. How's this accomplished? In other words, if the same amount of work like power steering assist is required, why is electric power steering more fuel efficient than hydraulic? And the difference comes down to demand. With a hydraulic, he's right. The same amount of work is required when you actually need the assist. The difference is that if you have a hydraulic steering pump, for example, that's being driven off the engine, it's driven off the engine continuously. So there's a constant load on the engine that's drawing some of the power and using some of the energy that's produced when you burn the fuel. With an electric system, it's only using energy when it's actually needed. So when you're driving straight down the road, down a straight flat road, and you're not turning the steering wheel, there's no energy being used for the electric power steering. Similarly, the first applications we've got in Europe of an electric turbo this year was launched in Europe on the Audi SQ7. Next year, 2017, Mercedes is launching some engines with electric turbos, and we're going to see more and more of those in the coming years. We're projecting about 6 million a year by the mid 2020s.
But the electric turbo though is like, that's a different thing. That's more like an end run around lag, right? Because the thing that drives the turbo is the pressure drop.
Yeah, but partially, so it's partially about the lag, but also, again, more on demand because the responsiveness is better. What happens is, when the driver hits the accelerator, you get that more immediate responsiveness, and it can, they may not go as deep into the accelerator as they might have otherwise. And so overall fuel consumption is reduced. And, you can combine it with other things like, for example, cylinder deactivation. If you've got a V6 engine that's running on 3 cylinders and you've also got an electric turbo on there, when you start climbing a mild grade, normally without that turbo, the engine might switch back to using all 6 cylinders. And therefore use more fuel. With an electric turbo, what can happen is even without the driver, going harder on the accelerator, if you're using cruise control or something, the powertrain controller can spin up the turbo a little bit, give you a little bit of boost, keep it running on 3 cylinders. And the combination of the electric turbo pumping more engine into those 3 running cylinders can give you the power you need to maintain your speed going up that grade, while still using less fuel overall than if you were running on all 6 cylinders. So there's all kinds of things like that give you incrementally better fuel economy when you start to add them all up.
Yeah. I mean, and so some of the electric systems too are better than others, which has been interesting to watch. The electric power steering for certain, some of the first systems were just really numb and not that satisfying to use. And that's because of the way they're designed. There's several different ways to pull it off. And even so the systems that are in Cadillacs, they actually couple it to the steering gear with a belt. And there's a little bit of give in that belt, and that's what gives you some of the sort of natural feeling back. Versus other systems where it's basically you are steering through the motor, the electric assist motor. So it's just much more insulated. So we're getting there with electric power steering that feels better. And, we went through this too with hydraulic power steering when we actually went to predominantly power steering versus manual rack and pinion or manual recirculating ball. Nobody liked the steering feel of hydraulic power steering back then because it was so light. So there's some fine tuning. It's getting better.
Yeah, the engineers are getting used to it. They're figuring out how to do it. And certainly with electric power steering, that enables things like, for example, drift compensation. So if you're driving down a road, and there's a crosswind, or there's a heavy crown to the road, that where your car might naturally tend to drift towards one side or the other. A lot of cars now have automatic drift compensation, so that if you've got the steering wheel pointed straight ahead, and the stability control sensors they recognize a little bit of yaw rate or lateral acceleration that's caused by a crown or a crosswind or something like that. It can actually use the electric power steering to essentially give you that steering correction that you would otherwise have to do manually, to basically keep you on the straight and narrow, while you just hold the steering wheel straight ahead.
Nobody else has been able to keep me on the straight and narrow. I don't want my car to do it.
Well,
it's... Yeah.
In theory,
and it does. It'll work together with the other sensors too. Even like lane keeping assist systems. They won't have to, some of them work by firing the brakes on one side to sort of turn the car like you would like a boat. Versus actually getting the steering involved, and you just tweak the valve a little bit one way or the other, and tweak the rack a little bit one way or the other, and it'll steer. So it's good because it's not that constant parasitic drag. And it's lighter, and that's less stuff.
Yeah, and that's things like electric water pumps and electric oil pumps. Those are going to come in the next several years as we start to see more vehicles equipped with 48 volt electrical systems. Right now the electric power steering we can manage with 12 volt electrical systems, but we need to go to higher voltages to get the electrical power we need in order to do things like electric cooling pumps and oil pumps. Once we get 48 volt systems on more vehicles, they'll start to adopt some of those electric pumps. So instead of having this big serpentine belt, driving all these accessories on the front of the engine continuously and, sucking up power from the engine, you'll just have the one belt that drives the 48 volt alternator. And then, everything else will be electrically driven only when it's needed.
And those motors are going to be smaller because they can be smaller at 48 volts because of Ohm's law. Hooray.
Yeah, exactly. And, one other thing too about the electric turbos is it also really aids packaging. When you've got an exhaust driven turbocharger, figuring out how to do the plumbing of getting the exhaust gases into the turbocharger, and then getting the other side of the turbo, to feed through an intercooler and into the intake side of the engine on the opposite side, that gets really complicated and adds a lot of weight. Packaging is just a royal pain under the hood. With an electric turbo, now all of a sudden you don't have to deal with, figuring out how you're going to route the exhaust gases into that thing. You've only got the compressor side and an electric motor driving it. And so it makes it a lot easier to package it all under the hood.
I'll buy that. And I think with that, we've bought another podcast. So,
all right.
Yeah, it's a Christmas episode because I don't know if we're gonna make it to another episode later this week before the holiday. So we may, but if we don't,
maybe we'll see.
If we don't, we'll catch everybody later. But certainly keep the questions rolling in. It's wheelbearingscast@gmail.com. We are Wheelbearings, no vowels, on Twitter. We have Facebook, which our friend Dan is managing. Let's see, where else are we? We're all over the place. We're working on it.
Yep. You go to wheelbearings.media is the site where you can find all the links to subscribe to the show.
Site. We're on iTunes.
Yeah. iTunes, Google Play Music, TuneIn, Pocket Casts, whatever podcatcher you want to use.
I looked for us in Stitcher the other day and we're not there. So
no, we're not in Stitcher. You actually have to submit to Stitcher, and then Stitcher's kind of funky. We'll have to take a look at what the deal is there. They do things a little differently there. We'll see if we can maybe get in there, but we'll work on that one.
All right. Well, with that, we'll let everybody go, and we'll have another podcast soon. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.